actually, a very practical question, because we do perform certain rituals that we do not know the significance of, and sometimes the questions do arise: why do we do this? And, why should we keep following these rituals or customs, or, dressing habits, or, the ways we adorn ourselves, etc. But again, I would say there are a lot of such rituals or traditions, I would say, that do have a deeper significance, that do have a deeper meaning. There may be a few which are surviving only because of habit, or only because of continuity of, passing on that tradition through generations. But a lot of them do have some significance. For example, just talking about applying of tilak or bindi, on the forehead. It is supposed to cool your highest chakra, the chakra which was at the forehead, just behind the junction of the eyebrows, So it's supposed to cool it, and it is supposed to help you become more aware of your environment. It's sort of like awakening the third eye. Now, the traditional material that was used to apply the tilak or the bindi was kumkum or haldi, which also have medicinal properties. Of course, when you're applying artificial chemical, that is not really helpful in achieving that purpose. When we're using the material that was recommended in the scriptures, I think then it serves its purpose, actually. But otherwise, it becomes a ritual, And again, I don't see any harm in following a ritual as well, as long as it makes you feel connected to your heritage, as long as it makes you feel a part of a bigger whole, of a bigger community. A ritual is unless it's harmful to someone else, If it's harmless, you're doing it for yourself, your own happiness. How does it make a difference, if you want to follow it or not follow it? But there are a lot of scientific reasons, for things that we do. Like even in the pandemic, a lot of people realized the importance of greeting others by not shaking their hands, by no physical contact, right? So namaste took a different form altogether. There were world leaders doing namaste, to greet each other. So, and at times like this, you realize that, yes, there was some sense, in these rituals. There could have been some logic why they started, and probably we are missing that logic now. But again, I'll give another example from the pandemic that, there's a mandatory quarantine period, of 10 to 14 days now. And at the time of a person's death in a Hindu household, there's a period of quarantine for 10 to 13 days, after which you do the kriya or the bhog, So this period is actually meant to ensure that, there is minimum interaction of the household with outsiders, So it's so that in case, there was some infectious disease because of which the deceased passed away, it is not spread in the community, So there's so many reasons, which we can understand now, which makes sense now. Why do we leave our footwear outside when we are entering the home? Why do all the precautions, the sanitary precautions that we were following at least in the lockdown, all of them or most of them are already there in our culture as our rituals. You're supposed to bathe 3 times a day, according to our scriptures. You're not supposed to touch unclean things. Whenever you go into the kitchen, or the person who's cooking food has to wash their hands and feet, and preferably take a bath, before going into the kitchen to start cooking. So there's so many things which, if you don't understand the significance of it, you feel that it's just unnecessary superstition. But when you realize that it is a matter of hygiene, which they were following, and in a country like India, which was a tropical country, there must have been various other infectious diseases as well, and all these rituals were meant to safeguard people from these things, so that, you follow precautions and you stay away from all these infectious diseases that are moving around. So I would say a lot of it makes sense. And the only missing link is we don't know the reason, or we don't know the logic. But even if we try to explore, I think there's still some sense that we can find. It's just, people are not willing to put a little effort in finding out why things were done, or why this is relevant. But a lot of sense still remains in many of the rituals. Some maybe only because of continuity of tradition, and it's up to you, whether you want to follow or not.
That's so true, and I think what habit that we've gotten, like in general, like our Indian. I don't know if it's true for Indian community or like as like on a global level also, that we've fallen into this path of rediscovering things, and we want to try them out for ourselves before we say that this is true. And in some senses that's true, and in some senses that's helpful. But again, sometimes I know that you must have related to this as well, and to the younger people that do listen to this, and they might also relate to this, younger than me, of course. Like your parents usually in your childhood, they told you, okay, go light a diya or sit in front of Bhagwan ji and fold your hands and say your prayers. And in school certainly this happened, morning prayers and everything. And as a young kid, I also sometimes felt ki, why are we standing in this morning sun, let us go back to our classes and things like that. But as you grow older and you sometimes look back on your life's journey or your practices that you had earlier, and sometimes it makes sense ki that moment, that was a reflection moment in the morning, and that was a gratitude moment, and it didn't have any logic, and to a kid it doesn't make sense, but it showed you that you can have gratitude in the morning and why it is helpful on shaping whatever your day will look like. And so these are things that catch up on later.
It also has a lot of scientific value also, Ripu. Exposure to sunlight early in the morning, when the sun is not very harsh, and it's supposed to help. I mean, sunlight helps create vitamin D in your skin. That's a scientific fact. Vitamin D in our bodies comes through the exposure to sunlight, major chunk of it. And that is a reason you would, if you talk to anybody, any doctor, they'll tell you that vitamin D deficiency is very prevalent in India. India is a tropical country. How are we getting deficient in vitamin D? Because all of us are sitting inside air-conditioned offices now. We are not exposed to the sunlight. And, this Surya Namaskar or, getting a darshan of the sun in the morning, and even rituals like, there's you're supposed to take a early morning oil bath on the day of Dashera, and this custom is not as prevalent today in the northern part of the country, but in the south, a lot of my southern friends from the southern states, they still follow that custom on the day of Dashera. In the morning of Dashera, there's an oil bath that you need to take with til oil, with sesame seeds, the oil extracted from sesame seeds. Again, there's logic to it. It's almost the beginning of winter, and before that happens and the sunlight starts to dwindle, you want to get maximum exposure to sun so that your body gets that required vitamin D, which can last you for a couple of months. So all these rituals have some kind of science behind, which it's just that we don't understand these points today. But when you start analyzing through the prism of science, you realize that a lot of these things start making sense.